to read you a poem to begin. Bathing Jesus by Aleki Barnstone. If he were a word made flesh, I would want to wake him from his godliness and wash his godliness from him as I bathe his feet in my laughing tears and dry them with my heat and hair and anoint the topography of his head with euphoric oil and comb his beard with electric fingers and pull his face close to mine to see the multitudes in the pores of his skin, God's intricate handiwork in his chin, in his cheek. He would see the flame in my eye burning in time's skull, deep as the first breath that lighted the Milky Way. I would pull the shirt from his shoulders and the shirt from mine until our garments lay on the floor, cloth lungs pulsating with the curtain's white muslin and the little breezes coming in the window, everything alive. Even the wood floor under our feet, warm with the oak's broad and branching spirit. And I would pour warm water on his back and thighs and wake the man in him, wake his hand, reaching for my flushed and water-slicked arm, his palm singeing the place below my collarbone. Make him taste each word on my tongue, each complex mix of sweet and bitter and sour and salt, and make him sing out from his body, the lips, the tongue, the throat, the heart, the blood, all the traveling heats of flesh. Praise them. I would stand before him, naked as Eve before the fall, or a babe newborn, and he would see no sin on my skin if he were a word made flesh. Aleki Barnstone. So this new book, Wild Mercy, Living the Fierce and Tender Wisdom of the Women Mystics, isn't some new shit I just made up. This is the product of my whole life, and it's the echo of a cultural conversation. Actually, I call it a fiesta that's unfolding. And I'm just one of many mouths that is singing this song of the emerging wisdom of the feminine across the spiritual traditions. So I grew up in a feminist home in the counterculture of the 1970s, where my family was a non-religious, anti-religious Jewish family from New York who uprooted us and plunked us into the proverbial caravan, and we traveled around for a year, a little bit around the United States, and mostly living on wild beaches of Mexico for a year at pristine Caribbean beach now known as Cancun, where the palm trees between which we hung our hammocks now have high-rise hotels, and the rooms are approximately $1,400 a night. And we subsisted on rice beans and the fish that we could catch from our little lines and our little poles. Anyway, I digress. But the point is, I grew up in a world that wasn't exactly mainstream, and that opened the way for me to be the way that I am, which is someone who responds to the wisdom of multiple spiritual traditions. The weird thing is, you guys, that I have made my living for the last 15 years as an interspiritual teacher, even considered to be somewhat of an interspiritual pioneer, and I am now wondering if it's bullshit. And that's okay. You know, it's good to question all your presuppositions, and I am in front of you. Thank you. Only because all those challenges I've received over the years from people who said that, well, they'd say stupid things like trying to get to God by tasting and drawing from the wisdom of multiple spiritual traditions is like trying to get to water by digging many shallow wells. I don't think that's true at all, and I think that's a harmful, even violent analogy for those of us who are naturally inclined to respond to multiple spiritual traditions. And so the only bullshit part is that I'm worried about is cultural appropriation. So I'm just onto it. I'm trying to pay attention. I'm trying to honor the fact that many of us seem to be temperamentally designed by the Holy One to say a big, juicy yes to the presence of the sacred in every holy house, everywhere we find her. And if we do so with deep respect to the keepers of the jewels, as I call them, the people who do choose a single tradition and guard those treasures, then I think we're going to be okay. I'm with Peter and everybody else at this gathering who has talked about the fact that we really don't know, there's a death going on, and we really don't know what's going to happen. But if we can show up for this process of global collective transformation with love, I think we're going to be okay. Even if we die, even if we all die. But we'll do it together in great love and awareness and community. Which leads me to the wisdom of the feminine, which is, of course, the wisdom of the collective, the roots that connect us all deep inside the belly of the mother. So I want to take my few minutes left to reclaim 3 classical wisdom teachings from the patriarchy. May I? Okay. And I'm going to work this out as I go a little bit, okay? So the first one is Christianity. So although I came from a family, secular Jewish family that rejected all religious institutions on the grounds that they're responsible for most of the suffering on the planet, both historically and presently, I was drawn to every single religion I ever encountered. And especially if they had like vestments and robes and special hats, you know, like that. But I knew, somehow something in me knew not to claim them as my own, but I was deeply attracted to and enamored with them. I lusted after them even. So Christianity was kind of the last on the list. So there was Judaism, there was Sufism, 3 different, what are they called? Yeah. 3 different initiations I have taken, and Sufi paths. Mystical Judaism's good. Hinduism, I've had a Hindu guru since I was 12, Neem Karoli Baba. Anybody? Neem Karoli Baba? Yes, thank you. A very basic Buddhist meditation practice since I was also about 15. So everything but Christianity until I fell in love with Rumi and then found his counterpart in San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, when I was living in Spain studying Spanish literature around age 20. And through John of the Cross, I ended up being a translator of John of the Cross and then Teresa of Avila. And through John and Teresa, I opened my heart finally, you know, in my 30s maybe, to Christ. And I'm really glad. I'm very grateful for that entry. It took a lot of suffering before I let Christ into the wealth of spiritual traditions that I hold dear. So one of the classic teachings of Christianity through San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, is the dark night of the soul. And I'm going to give you the 30-second version. I've translated the dark night of the soul. And I could go on for 11 years to talking about dark night of the soul. So let's see what I can do in a minute. The dark night of the soul is a natural state of spiritual crisis that unfolds as we develop and mature on the spiritual path. According to John of the Cross, this spiritual crisis that is absolutely necessary because it is completely and utterly transformational has two components: the night of sense and the night of spirit. In the night of sense, all of our spiritual attachments, our sensory attachments, the night of sense, the way we are accustomed to feeling the presence of the sacred, dry up. We go into this deep desert space where it just becomes empty, and the ways that we used to be able to access that felt sense of the divine no longer work, no matter what our belief systems are. And if we stay with it, and if we are mature enough, John says, we might progress to the more harrowing night of spirit, in which all of our conceptual constructs are stripped from us, and our belief systems no longer hold up. In fact, they collapse, and it's devastating. You could call it a crisis of faith, but it's much more intense than that. It's nothing makes sense anymore. Our discursive minds are completely useless. And so the result of that is to rest in the unknown, in the mystery, in liminal space. So guys make a really big deal of this state of liminality and ambiguity. But the feminine, this is her abode. Now, when I speak about feminine and masculine, please understand that I'm speaking about those qualities in all people of all genders, and no gender identity at all. All of us, I think, are thirsting for I feel every day of my life, are thirsting for the feminine right now, men as deeply as women. And so the domain, the abode, the landscape of the feminine is one that is at home with the mystery, with things not having clear answers, with abiding sometimes in these spaces of radical mystery. And so I want to reclaim this dark night of the soul teaching, not as some austere, rigorous spiritual discipline where we flex our spiritual muscles and get through our dark nights of the soul, but as this relaxing into the land of the feminine where mystery is the most celebrated reality. Moving on. How about Hinduism? Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism. Again, I feel that non-duality has become, and I know many of you have heard me say this and read it in my work, that the non-dual movement has become in some ways rigidly dualistic, because those of us who have more devotional impulses are considered to be somehow, that's considered to be an inferior state. Like, you'll get over it, you'll grow out of it. It's kind of like a hormonal surge, and then you get through it and you can be a mature adult who can contain your attractions and things like that. So for me, the true non-dual reality begins in the devotional heart. That when we allow our hearts to break open with longing for the beloved, into that very shattered container flows the light of divine love, and all distinctions naturally dissolve. So lover, as San Juan de la Cruz says in his beautiful poem, Dark Night of the Soul, is transformed in beloved. In Christianity, I can't help but mix my metaphors. I tried to categorize them, but it didn't work. In the Christian mystical tradition, in the via negativa, which is the apophatic tradition, there are 3 stages. There's the via purgativa of purgation and purification, then the via illuminativa, where we empty out the chamber in our co-creative efforts with the Holy One, and the divine light pours into that scoured vessel. And then in the via unitiva, the vessel itself dissolves in the warmth of love, of that illumination of the divine. That's how it is for me with the non-dual path coming from the Advaita Vedanta tradition. It's rooted in bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, the warmth, the hot honey of love dissolves the boundaries, not some concepts that we're all one. And when I'm working with people of color these days, especially young women of color, it's what Lila spoke about at the end of her talk. It is painful for people, marginalized people, to hear us say we're all one, because they don't experience their privileged access to a unitive state on a social and grounded human level. And so I feel like it's the same philosophically. If we allow those concepts to be deconstructed now in this great collective dying that we're experiencing, we can allow ourselves to actually experience the dissolving into love that used to be an idea and also a state that we would attain through rigorous spiritual discipline and long periods of silence. I'm not sure that's so necessary anymore. I think it helps to have a contemplative practice. In fact, it's vital to have some sort of contemplative practice so that when we experience this dismantling, we're able to sit with it and tolerate the ambiguity. But there's an element of joy and celebration in this, what used to be an abstract concept that I'm inviting us to reclaim, that to me is a feminine reality. And it involves reclaiming the body, the Word made flesh. Thanks. So if we look through these teachings through the lens of relationship rather than, as somebody said, private, personal salvation and liberation, I think we'll have access to the love that leads us into unitive reality. So finally, the teachings of Buddhism, of the triple gem or the 3 jewels of taking refuge. It's the refuge vow, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We seem to forget the refuge part. That's the feminine part to me. Taking refuge in the Buddha. So I want to suggest, in reclaiming the feminine aspects of these teachings from the patriarchy, that we take refuge in the Buddha in the form of women teachers. They have been very successfully buried. Their voices have been marginalized for far too long. The Buddha exists in the form of women teachers, both from the past, across the spiritual spectrum, and right now. Look for them. They're known and they're unknown. Take refuge in the Buddha in the form of women teachers. Take refuge in the Dharma, the body of teachings. So we've got the teachers and we've got the teachings. The women, the wisdom of the feminine wisdom teachings are everywhere. Find them, mine them. They've been intentionally stuck deep, deep under the ground. Lift them up and take refuge in them. And finally, take refuge in the Sangha, in the form of circles of women. Even if you're not a woman, center and presence the voices of the feminine in any space that involves multiple beings, the collective, community, the voices of the feminine, the Sangha, which Thich Nhat Hanh said is the most important of the 3 jewels. That is, the new Buddha is the Sangha, I think Thich Nhat Hanh said. Take refuge in circles of women, and if they're circles of mixed genders, then make sure if you're of the boy variety, to shut up and listen and lift up those voices. I'm going to end with a poem. From the Almanac of Last Things. Almanac of Last Things is the name of the poem by Linda Pastan. From the Almanac of Last Things, I choose the spider lily for the grace of its brief blossom, though I myself fear brevity. But I choose the song of songs because the flesh of those pomegranates has survived all the frost of dogma. I choose January with its chill lessons of patience and despair, and August, too sunstruck for lessons. I choose a thimbleful of red wine to make my heart race, then another to help me sleep. From the Almanac of Last Things, I choose you, as I have done before, and I choose evening, because the light clinging to the window is at its most reflective, just as it's ready to go out. Thank you, beloveds.